basically all we did was smoke, eat, and have sex. So throughout the entirety of the day, I was just high and eating a ton of junk food and fucking pretty much like multiple times a day. Hello there, YouTube land. I'm happy to be back. This is another video where I just spill my guts about everything. As you can probably tell from the title, this is going to be talking about my 5-year, almost 5.5-year vegan journey so far. And I would like to caveat by saying I will not be going too deep into the science of plant-based eating and veganism, because I can make a plethora of content just from that alone. So I'm going to be mainly talking about my experience, my journey, the things that I've learned, what I've felt, my thoughts on veganism, and that entire ordeal. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. I guess I'll start with the beginning, where everything started. Day 1 through 10. So I remember back at the end of 2017, I decided to do a 10-day vegan challenge out of curiosity. I had sort of been dabbling in the research. I'd had a few YouTubers that I was watching at the time that were recommending plant-based diets, so I figured, why the hell not? It probably wouldn't kill me. And, at the time, I still had all those stupid misconceptions in my head about plant-based eating, such as, nutrient deficiencies, not having enough protein, becoming weak, becoming lethargic, all these things that were absolutely not true, that I had an inherent fear of just because of the programming that was instilled into me all throughout the years. Especially living in the US, we have this really backwards and messed up view of nutrition, and it makes sense because the powers that be, the corporations that basically run the educational institutions and run the media, they're always advocating for animal-based diets because, well, that's what kills you. So 10-day vegan challenge, I decided to try it, and I had really no expectations. After the 10 days, I did end up going back to eating fish, and at the time, I was still living with my parents. I didn't really have too much experience with cooking, just from what my mom and my grandma taught me, things of that nature. And I was mainly eating things like mushrooms and fried rice and onions and potatoes and very basic things, not anything too crazy. So I decided to go back to eating fish and eating eggs. And after that point, I kind of was like, what the hell am I doing? Because I started looking into the environmental impact of eating animal products, and I was just flabbergasted. And I was always also looking into the things that cholesterol and saturated fat does to the body. At the time that I was going through this, I was in a very weird spot in my life because there was a lot of transition going on. I was still living with my parents at the time, and I was just transitioning over to a new job and a weird relationship at the time. So plant-based eating was like the last thing on my mind. But at the same time, I was like, what? There's really no point in going back to eating animals. Around that same time, I decided to start studying nutrition as well. And I had the worst eating habits. My eating habits were absolute garbage. My pattern of eating was basically this: not eat throughout most of the day. Around like maybe 3 or 4 o'clock, I'd start eating, and I'd be like grazing here and there, having snacks at work and stuff like that. And at night, I was binge eating so bad. I'd be eating like 1,500 calories at once. So it was this very destructive sort of pattern of not eating throughout the day and then eating a ton at night. And it was very, what's the word I'm looking for? it was just extremely unhealthy and destructive. So while I was studying nutrition, I was like, should I start fasting? Should I start tracking food? All this stuff seems super confusing to me. And throughout my journey, I realized that it's way more simple than that. And I'll get into the simplicity of the whole thing. What veganism honestly is just causing the least amount of harm and the least amount of suffering as humanly possible. And basically what that means is, are you going to stop driving your car to work because it harms the environment? No, because that's not really humanly possible. Are you going to be nitpicky about every single piece of clothing in your wardrobe that you already bought? No, probably not. Humanly possible just means what is deemed necessary. Eating animal products is just not necessary in our day and age at all, because we can get all of our nutrition through plants and through fungus. You just eating plants and mushrooms, we can get all our nutrition, and the nutrients that we can't get, it's not that hard to pop a supplement. Going on, I started doing more research on the foods that affect us in a certain way, and I started doing more research on training. Around the same time, I did start to become a trainer. I started training people in kickboxing and doing group classes and things of that nature, and also started diving more and more deeper into the nutrition aspect. So fast forward about a year and a half to 2 years, I got better at tracking what I was eating, and I got better at cooking and better at being mindful on what I was doing, but I was still eating a shit ton of junk food. Guys, just because something is vegan, it does not make it healthy. I can be sitting here on my ass, eating a ton of cereal, eating a ton of cookies, eating a bunch of ice cream, eating a ton of fried foods, just becoming obese. And believe it or not, I have seen obese vegans before. It's a very rare specimen, but trust me, they do exist. At this time, I loved eating ice cream and protein bars and chips and all sorts of dips, like frying stuff in oil, ton of sugar, ton of processed foods. It was getting really bad. So even though I was eating plant-based, I was not really being responsible on the content I was eating. And at the same time, I also had other destructive habits going on. Around the 1.5, 2 year mark, I was living with my ex-girlfriend now, but my girlfriend at the time, and we had really destructive patterns. Like, basically all we did was smoke, eat, and have sex. So throughout the entirety of the day, I was just high and eating a ton of junk food and f***ing pretty much like multiple times a day. So even though I was plant-based and following a vegan diet, I didn't have the healthiest of habits. So after that whole ordeal, that relationship transpired, I was in a very rocky state of mind, and I was in a really tough spot in my life. I started to take my training and nutrition a little bit more seriously, because I'm like, you know what, like, I'm tired of carrying all this excess fat around. I'm tired of just being out of breath after running only a mile. I'm tired of just not having energy throughout the day. And all these people I was following, they're like, oh yeah, the vegan diet, like, it gives me so much energy, I sleep better, blah, blah, blah. And I experienced a little bit of that. However, I didn't really feel the same way. And that's the thing, guys. I don't want you to think that a plant-based diet is a cure-all for everything. A plant-based diet, if done correctly with whole foods, can prevent some of the most awful disease-causing sicknesses, but it is not a cure-all for everything. So I'm like, okay, this has to stop. I got to transition to more whole foods. I started cooking more. I started eating more fruits and veggies. I decided to cut out sugar. I decided to stop buying a ton of ice cream and protein bars and chips and fried foods. And I started to dial in on my training a little bit more. It was also at this time that I realized the spiritual, for lack of a better word, I realized the spiritual impact of being vegan. Because you got to think, guys, the food system is centered around breeding animals into existence for us to eat and us to consume. These animals are going through lots of turmoil, lots of suffering. They're going through a ton of stress. You know, you got to think about a cow being raped essentially to produce milk. Once her calf is born, it's taken away from her, and then she's kept in a confined space, and then eventually bolt gun to the head, or having her throat stabbed and slit. This whole time, the animal is going through a ton of stress, and as we know through psychology, emotions are psychosomatic. Psychosomatic means that they manifest themselves physically, and our emotional state of being affects the way our DNA transcribes and multiplies. So if you're taking an animal carcass and eating it, and that animal has gone through a ton of turmoil and suffering and stress, you are becoming that stress and turmoil and anguish. Your DNA is adapting to what you're eating and becoming what you're eating. That whole "you are what you eat" quote, it's super generic, but it's true. 90% of your overall well-being has to do with what you're putting in your body. How I describe it to people is that your body is a supercomputer. Your body is a supercomputer in everything that you're doing, whether it be a physical activity, the media you consume through books and television and all that, and the food that you're eating. All of it is coding. Everything that we're doing is algorithms and variables, and you're manipulating these variables to code your computer, your supercomputer, which is your vessel. Taking animal products into account, you're coding yourself with all that emotional stress, and you're coding yourself with all those toxins. So I really began to dive deep into that, and I realized that, like, wow, even though I'm not the best at cooking and following a whole foods diet, and I'm still, eating junk food and stuff, at least I'm not getting the stress and turmoil of these animals who are suffering. And one thing that gave me the biggest amount of relief is that I am not paying for these systems. I'm not paying for these oppressive systems that are keeping these animals locked up in confined spaces, forcing them to suffer, breeding them into existence just so I can have a sandwich. If you really sit and think about it, it's all about supply and demand. Paying for suffering, paying for animal abuse. And we like to be really disconnected. We like to be so disconnected from the process because we don't gotta hunt the shit. You know what I mean? We don't gotta go out into wilderness and hunt these animals. Maybe then we'd be a little more connected to the process, but we're just going to the grocery store and paying for this meat, paying for this animal carcass, and paying for these bodily fluids and excretions. We're not seeing where it's produced, how it's made, and the suffering that the animal is going through. I'm not really one to push my beliefs down people's throats. I'm not really one to tell somebody how to live, but you gotta think, when there's a victim involved and when you have control of being able to fund and pay for these victims to be slaughtered, then it's your responsibility. At that point, it's your responsibility. Think about this. If I put a hit out on someone, right? If I put a hit on someone to get assassinated and I hire a hitman to kill this person, and the murder gets linked back to me, I still get charged for the murder. It's the same thing here. We're paying for animal abuse and animal murder through our food decisions. A couple years down the line, taking nutrition more seriously, taking training more seriously, being mindful of my shitty behavioral patterns, being mindful of the mistakes I made, I started to make more and more drastic changes. So it wasn't even until a couple years down the line that I started making these changes. And that's when I really began to transform. In the beginning, I would have considered myself plant-based because, I was still eating honey. I was still buying leather clothing. I wasn't under the philosophy of veganism fully, but 2-3 years down the line, that all changed. And I really dove into the philosophy of causing the least harm possible. And it was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders because I'm like, wow, I really am in control. I'm in control of 90% of what happens to me and the environment I create for myself. And veganism was a huge part of that because it helped me realize that. I took a lot of responsibility and I did a lot of healing and a lot of transformation between the 3 and 4 year mark. And it turned me into the person I am today. Because of veganism, I decided to become a transformational coach. I decided to get certified in nutrition and become a certified personal trainer and start studying agriculture, start studying human behavior and all these things, and realizing just how much of a hypocrite I was and how much cognitive dissonance I had because I didn't want to consider myself an animal abuser, but I was paying for the abuse to happen. So I really started to dial in. And the further and further I got, the more I became mindful and the more I became aware. And all the things that my favorite influencers were talking about, I started to experience. I started to experience the level of energy that they had and the level of awareness you get and just being happy about life. I was becoming the person I was idolizing. I was becoming the type of individual that I had saw being successful. One of my philosophies that I live by is you have to acquire what you admire. So if you're looking at celebrities and you're looking at your idols and they're achieving all these things and you're wanting that for yourself, you can't just sit there on the sidelines, just letting your life pass you by and watching all these other people succeed. No, you got to go achieve that shit. You got to make it happen for yourself because you will become the biggest shell of yourself. And I don't care how old you are, if you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, you will become the biggest shell of yourself if you're just sitting there on the sidelines watching other people achieve stuff. And, a lot of this doesn't have to do too much with the philosophy of veganism, but veganism helped me actualize all these things and it helped me realize all these things. And a lot of people see it as this cult sort of thing, right? People see veganism as a cult, like we're, meeting in some sort of dark dungeon at night and having all these rituals and worshiping Mother Gaia and sacrificing our health to Mother Earth. And really all it is just being mindful and getting to the point where you're like, I don't have to cause suffering to other living beings anymore. And all this feels so good to get off my chest because I talk about this a lot with people individually, but I've never come out about it like this. And it makes me feel so good that I am able to get on this platform and share it. A lot of people are going to disagree with me about this, but guys, at the 5-year mark, there's no going back. If somebody offered me $10 million right now to eat a hamburger that was a cow and it was free range, it was raised all happy and stuff, and it was killed in the most humane way possible, I would not eat it. I would say, hell no, turn the around, get that shit out of my face. Because I have the integrity and I have the responsibility, and we all have the responsibility to cause as little harm as possible. Now at the 5-year mark, I've never been happier. I've never been more aware. I've never been more mindful and excited to be alive. And I attribute a lot of that to veganism because it helped me express the emotions and depression and all these things I was suffering through and release them finally. And it was all a journey, and everyone's journey is different. I went vegan initially for health reasons, right? I wanted to be a healthier individual, and I wanted to, do the best for my body, even though I was still doing it in the most not optimal way possible. Some people go vegan for the environment to where they don't care about their nutrition. Some people go vegan because they care about the animals. Some people go vegan because they were raised that way. Whatever your reasoning is, that's where the future is headed. We're headed towards a really weird time right now. For the past couple years, the dairy industry and the meat industry have been getting millions of dollars of bailouts because people are realizing that all this paying for suffering and paying for murder is not necessary. Within the next couple months, I am pretty convinced that there's going to be food shortages. And I want you guys to realize that going vegan and eating plant-based is actually super cheap. The number one misconception that people have with going vegan is that, oh, it's expensive. Hell yeah, it's expensive if you're shopping at Whole Foods and buying processed foods, buying vegan meats, buying vegan cheeses. It all is actually super cheap. Think about the most cheapest foods. All of them are vegan. Legumes such as edamame and lentils, super cheap. Beans are super cheap. Rice is super cheap. A lot of veggies and a lot of greens, they're super cheap. Animal products is what's hella expensive. Most of the time, animal products is what's going to be breaking your bank. Enough of me ranting about that, though. I just want to say that at the 5-year mark, everything is freaking amazing. Everything is awesome. I'm going to be that much more adamant on the activism on the animal side. But as a nutritionist, I want to stress the health side and the awareness side. And as a transformational coach, I want to stress the responsibility and the destructive behavioral patterns of everybody. And that is going to be my duty. I vow to continue, and I vow to put even more effort into helping people transform their lives. And part of that is teaching people that you don't need animal products in your life. I think throughout this video, I'm going to be showing the photos throughout the year so you guys can see this transformation. Now, I'm stronger than I've ever been. I can, at this point, I can easily pull 450 pounds over the floor. I can definitely, overhead press at 160 pounds is not that impressive, but it's way stronger than I've ever been. I couldn't even do 80 pounds about 4 years ago. I think I'm just going to become a monster, and I'm always going to be vegan. I'm going to be vegan until the day that I die. Nothing is going to change. If anything, I'm just dialing in more, and I'm becoming more of the person I've always wanted to be. And through following this philosophy, through being healthier, through being more mindful, I'm acquiring what I've admired for the longest. So on all planes, whether it's the mental plane, physical plane, spiritual plane, plant-based eating and veganism is the way to go. And it's helped me a lot. 5 years into being, almost 5.5 years into being plant-based, It's all good. Everything's just going to keep getting better. I appreciate you guys listening to me rant. I don't know how long this video is. It's probably hella long. I've probably been talking for so freaking long. But it doesn't matter because you guys watched all the way through. And I appreciate you making it to the end. I appreciate you being on this journey with me. If I can do anything to make it easier for you guys, I'm going to keep doing it. Stay tuned for more videos going over nutrition, going over fitness, going over mental wellness, going over philosophy. I love philosophy. We're going to keep at it, and we're all in this together. Let's be more mindful. Let's be more present. Let's enjoy life. Let's keep making some awesome gains as well. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace and love.